Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome to Mr. Peter Stories. Before we dive in, I want to say a heartfelt prayer for our beautiful family. May we all be blessed with health, happiness, and strength. May we always support each other and spread love in everything we do. Dear Lord, we come before you with grateful hearts, asking for your continued blessings over this beautiful family. We pray for health, peace, and strength for each member, and for protection from any harm or negativity that may come our way. We ask that you bless our minds with wisdom, our hearts with love, and our lives with joy. May we continue to grow in faith, support one another through every trial, and be a light to those around us. Lord, please watch over Binta and grant her the healing and strength she needs during this time. We trust in your grace and hold on to the hope you provide. Amen. Now, how was the last story? Did you enjoy it? If you are satisfied with my work, type yes in the comments. Your support means the world to me. Binta is not feeling well at the moment, so please keep her in your prayers. We truly appreciate all your love. And have you told your friends and family about my work? Let's continue to grow together and share these beautiful stories. Let's begin with love. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the towering glass windows of Prince Industries, painting golden streaks across the pristine marble floor. Zara Sweet stood in the cavernous foyer, her reflection fractured across the polished surfaces surrounding her. Her hands trembled slightly as they clutched the leather portfolio, a weight far heavier than its physical presence suggested. Inside that portfolio lay the evidence of her stepfather, Andrew Simmons' betrayal, detailed financial records showing nearly $2 million systematically drained from the company's charitable foundation. Each document represented another crack in the foundation of her world, another thread in the web of lies that had ensnared her family. The security guard at the desk kept glancing her way, perhaps noting how she seemed out of place in her simple navy dress among the parade of power suits and designer wear. Zara had spent her last savings on this outfit, knowing this meeting could determine not just her future, but her father's fate as well. She reached up to touch the small silver locket at her throat, her mother's final gift before passing away 6 years ago. The familiar gesture brought little comfort today. "Miss Sweet," the executive assistant's voice cut through her thoughts. "Mr. Prince will see you now." Zara followed the clicking of the assistant's heels across the lobby, each step echoing like a countdown. The elevator ride to the 50th floor was silent, save for the soft hum of machinery and the pounding of her heart. She caught glimpses of her reflection in the mirrored walls, dark eyes wide with apprehension, coffee-colored skin pale with anxiety, and her normally confident posture betraying her fear. The elevator opened directly into a reception area that seemed designed to intimidate. Modern art pieces worth more than her yearly salary adorned the walls, while a massive abstract sculpture dominated the center of the room. The message was clear. This was the domain of power, of wealth, of influence far beyond her world. "Right this way," the assistant directed, leading her to a set of imposing double doors. Ashwell Prince's office was somehow both exactly what she expected and completely surprising. The space was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city below. But rather than the ultra-modern aesthetic of the reception area, the office held an unexpected warmth. Rich wooden furniture, leather-bound books, and what appeared to be local artists' works created an atmosphere that was powerful yet approachable. The man himself stood with his back to the door, gazing out at the city he'd helped shape. At 35, Ashwell Prince had become legendary in business circles for building an empire from nothing. The gossip columns painted him as ruthless, brilliant, and impossibly demanding. They hadn't mentioned how he would make her heart skip a beat. He turned at their entrance, and Zara felt the full force of his presence. Tall and broad-shouldered, he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who never questioned their place in the world. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, but it was his eyes that captured her attention, deep brown and startlingly perceptive. "Miss Sweet," he said, his voice deeper than she'd imagined. "Please, have a seat." The assistant disappeared, closing the doors behind her with a soft click that seemed to seal Zara's fate. She perched on the edge of one of the leather chairs facing his desk, clutching the portfolio like a shield. "I understand you have something urgent to discuss." Prince settled into his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. Zara swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. The carefully prepared speech she'd rehearsed all morning evaporated under his gaze. "Mr. Prince, I'm here about the Foundation's missing funds." His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Continue." With trembling fingers, Zara opened the portfolio and began laying out documents on his desk. Bank statements, transfer records, falsified reports, the paper trail of destruction her stepfather had left in his wake. $2 million, she said softly, systematically diverted over the past 18 months. Prince picked up one of the documents, scanning it with practiced ease. "And you're bringing this to my attention because it was my stepfather, Andrew Simmons." The words felt like ashes in her mouth. "And because I want to make it right." He set down the paper, leaning back in his chair. "These funds were meant for children's education programs, medical assistance for families in need, community development projects. The damage done isn't just financial." "I know." Zara's voice cracked slightly. "I teach at one of the schools that receives foundation support. I've seen firsthand the difference these programs make." Something flickered across Prince's face. Surprise, perhaps, or interest. "Yet you're here defending the man responsible?" "No." Zara straightened her spine, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she had. "I'm here to offer a solution. My stepfather has assets, properties. I have documentation of all of them. They can be liquidated to repay the foundation." "That's a start." Prince stood, walking to the window. The setting sun painted his profile in shades of gold and shadow. "But it doesn't address the breach of trust, the Foundation's reputation, the potential scandal if this becomes public." Zara's heart sank. She'd known it wouldn't be simple, but hearing him say it made it real. "Please," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I'll do anything to protect my father. He's sick. His heart. The stress of arrest, imprisonment. It would kill him." Prince turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "Anything?" The word hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Zara met his gaze steadily, despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Within legal and ethical bounds, yes. I'm not here to trade one wrong for another." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Admirable principles, Miss Sweet. But what exactly are you offering?" "My time, my skills. I can work to repay the debt, nights, weekends, whatever it takes." She gestured to the documents on his desk. "I found all of this. I can help prevent it from happening again. Strengthen your security protocols, review procedures." An interesting proposal. Prince returned to his desk but remained standing, his presence looming over her. "But I have plenty of accountants and security consultants. What makes you unique?" Zara stood as well, refusing to be intimidated. "Because I care. About the Foundation's mission. About the people it helps. About making things right." She took a deep breath. "And because I'm willing to do whatever it takes to protect my family while ensuring justice is served." Prince studied her for a long moment, and Zara felt as though he was seeing straight through to her soul. Finally, he spoke. 3 nights. "I'm sorry?" The foundation hosts 3 major charitable events in the next 2 weeks: galas, auctions, benefits, essential for maintaining donor relationships and public trust. He picked up one of the documents, turning it over in his hands. Attend them with me. Help demonstrate that all is well with the foundation. Your presence as someone connected to both sides of this situation could help smooth over any concerns that might arise. Zara's mind raced. It wasn't what she'd expected, but it seemed almost too simple. And in exchange? In exchange, we keep this matter private. Your stepfather makes restitution through asset liquidation, as you suggested. No criminal charges, no public scandal. His eyes locked with hers. But Miss Sweet, understand this. If you agree, you must commit fully to the role. These events require sophistication, charm, the ability to navigate complex social waters while maintaining absolute discretion. The implications were clear. She would have to play the part of someone from his world, someone worthy of being seen on Ashwell Prince's arm. The challenge was enormous, but the stakes were even higher. Do we have a deal? Prince extended his hand across the desk. Zara looked at his offered hand, then back to his face. In his eyes, she saw something unexpected, not the coldness of a businessman making a transaction, but a flicker of something warmer, more human. It gave her hope that perhaps this arrangement could be survived with her dignity intact. She placed her hand in his, trying to ignore the spark of electricity that shot through her at the contact. We have a deal, Mr. Prince. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. Ashwell, please. If we're to carry this off convincingly, we should at least be on a first-name basis. Ashwell, she repeated softly, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. He released her hand, but the warmth lingered. My assistant will contact you with the details. The first event is tomorrow night. He paused, then added, Don't worry about attire. Everything will be arranged. Zara gathered her documents with trembling fingers, her mind already spinning with the implications of what she'd agreed to. As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. Zara. She turned back, startled by his use of her first name. He was watching her with that same unreadable expression. You're either very brave or very foolish to come here today. I'm curious to find out which. She met his gaze one last time. Maybe I'm both. The ghost of a smile returned to his lips. Maybe you are. Until tomorrow night, then. Zara left his office on unsteady legs, the weight of the portfolio replaced by the weightier burden of their agreement. As the elevator descended, she caught her reflection again in the mirrored walls. The same woman looked back at her, but something had changed. In her eyes was a mix of fear and determination, of desperation and hope. She touched her mother's locket again, drawing strength from the familiar metal. I'll make this right, she whispered to her reflection, whatever it takes. The marble foyer seemed different on her way out, the golden sunlight replaced by the deep blues of approaching evening. As she stepped out into the cooling air, Zara felt the first stirrings of something unexpected beneath her anxiety and fear, curiosity about the man she'd just met, and the 3 nights that lay ahead. What she couldn't know then was how those 3 nights would change everything, her world, her heart, and the very course of her life. Chapter 2. The first evening. The dress arrived at precisely 3 p.m., carried by a white-gloved courier who handled the garment bag as if it contained spun gold. Zara's hands trembled as she unzipped it, revealing a creation that took her breath away. The gown was midnight blue, the color of dreams and distant stars, with delicate beading that caught the light like dewdrops at dawn. A note accompanied the dress, written in bold, precise handwriting. For tonight's Children's Hospital benefit, a car will arrive at 7 a.m. In her tiny apartment bathroom, she spent hours preparing, trying to transform herself into someone worthy of such finery. Her natural curls she styled into an elegant updo, letting a few tendrils frame her face. The dress fit as if it had been made for her, which, she realized with a start, it probably had been. At exactly 7 p.m., a sleek black car pulled up outside her building. The driver opened the door, revealing Ashwell Prince sitting inside, his tuxedo making him even more devastatingly handsome than he'd been in his business suit. He stood as she approached, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance. "You look—" He paused, seeming to search for the right word. "Perfect." The simple compliment sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Thank you," she murmured, accepting his hand as she slid into the car. "The dress is beautiful." "The dress is merely a frame," he replied, his voice low. "You're the masterpiece." The ride to the benefit was filled with soft tension, like the air before a storm. Ashwell briefed her on the evening ahead, key donors she would meet, the Foundation's recent achievements, the delicate politics of philanthropy. Zara absorbed it all, determined not to let him down. "Remember," he said, as they approached the venue, "tonight isn't about the money that was taken. It's about the children we're helping." His use of "we" wasn't lost on her. "I understand." The Children's Hospital benefit was being held at the city's most prestigious hotel, its grand ballroom transformed into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across the crowd, while soft classical music wove through the air. Zara felt the weight of eyes upon them as they entered, Ashwell's hand resting lightly at the small of her back. "Ashwell!" A woman in her 60s approached, dripping in diamonds and goodwill. "We were beginning to think you wouldn't make it." "Mrs. Blackwood," Ashwell smiled warmly. "I wouldn't miss it. May I introduce Zara Sweet? She's one of our Foundation's most passionate advocates." Zara felt a surge of gratitude at his careful introduction, technically true, while revealing nothing of their complicated arrangement. She smiled and extended her hand. "It's wonderful to meet you. I was just reading about your work with the Pediatric Oncology Wing." Mrs. Blackwood's eyes lit up, and soon they were deep in conversation about the hospital's newest initiatives. Zara spoke from her heart about the children she taught who had benefited from the Foundation's medical assistance programs. She didn't have to fake her passion or her knowledge. This was her world, even if the glittering ballroom wasn't. As they moved through the crowd, Zara felt Ashwell's gaze on her frequently. Each time she successfully navigated a conversation or charmed another donor, she caught a flash of something in his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or surprise. During dinner, they were seated with the hospital's chief of pediatrics and several major donors. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from the latest medical technologies to the arts program Zara had helped establish at her school. "You never mentioned you were an artist," Ashwell murmured as the plates were being cleared. "There's a lot we don't know about each other," she replied softly. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "I'm beginning to see that." After dinner came dancing. Ashwell led her onto the floor as the orchestra began a waltz. His hand was warm against hers, his other hand resting properly at her waist. They moved together as if they'd danced 1,000 times before. "You're full of surprises," he said as they twirled past other couples. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" "My mother," Zara answered, a bittersweet smile touching her lips. She believed every girl should know how to waltz. "We practiced in our living room, counting steps while my father played old records." "Tell me about her," Ashwell said, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. So she did. As they danced, Zara shared stories of her mother's strength, her creativity, her unwavering belief in education as the key to a better future. She spoke of the illness that took her too soon and how Andrew Simmons had entered their lives afterward. promising to take care of them. "You were young," Ashwell observed. "Too young to see what kind of man he really was." "My father was drowning in grief and medical bills," Zara said quietly. Andrew seemed like an answer to prayer. By the time we realized the truth, she trailed off, the weight of recent events pressing down on her. Ashwell's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "You're not responsible for his actions, aren't I? I saw the signs, the late-night phone calls, the mysterious meetings, the way he dodged questions about the foundation's finances. I should have done something sooner." "You're doing something now," he reminded her. "That takes courage." The music changed to something slower, more intimate. Without discussing it, they adjusted their stance, moving closer together. Zara could feel the steady beat of his heart, smell the subtle notes of his cologne. "May I show you something?" he asked as the song ended. At her nod, he led her away from the ballroom through a set of French doors that opened onto a private garden. The night air was cool and sweet, fairy lights twinkling in the carefully manicured trees. A fountain burbled nearby, its sound mixing with the muted music from inside. "This garden is my favorite part of the hotel," Ashwell said, leading her along a winding path. "It reminds me of where I started." "What do you mean?" He stopped beside a rosebush, its blooms pale in the moonlight. "My first job was as a gardener's assistant, minimum wage, long hours in the sun. But I learned something valuable. With patience and care, beautiful things can grow in the most unlikely places." Zara studied his profile, seeing beyond the powerful businessman to the young man who had built himself from nothing. "Is that why you started the foundation?" "Partly," he turned to face her. "I know what it's like to need help, to have potential but lack resources. The foundation isn't just charity, it's investment in human potential." "Which makes what Andrew did even worse," Zara said softly. "Look at me." His voice was firm but kind. When she met his eyes, he continued, "Tonight I've watched you champion our cause, connect with donors, inspire people to give more. You didn't just wear a pretty dress and smile, you showed them the real impact of what we do. That matters more than the money your stepfather took." Tears pricked at Zara's eyes. "You're nothing like I expected," she whispered. "Neither are you." His hand came up to brush away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. The touch was feather-light, but sent electricity coursing through her. "When you walked into my office yesterday, I thought I had you figured out. Another society girl trying to fix Daddy's mistakes. I've never been happier to be wrong." They stood there in the moonlit garden, the moments stretching between them like spun glass. Zara was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of his hand that had moved to cup her cheek, of the way his eyes seemed to hold entire galaxies. A burst of laughter from the ballroom broke the spell. Ashwell dropped his hand, taking a small step back. "We should return. There are still people you need to meet." Zara nodded, trying to slow her racing heart. As they walked back toward the light and music, she felt different, stronger somehow, more certain of herself. Whatever this arrangement was between them, it had shifted tonight into something more complex than a simple business deal. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and conversations. Zara played her part perfectly, but she was increasingly aware of Ashwell's presence, of the way his hand would find the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd, of how his eyes sought hers across the room. When the car finally dropped her at her apartment in the early hours of the morning, Zara felt as though she'd stepped out of a dream. But the memory of Ashwell's touch on her cheek, the warmth in his eyes as he'd watched her dance, those felt more real than anything in her regular life. She carefully hung up the beautiful dress, her fingers lingering on the beading. 2 more nights, she reminded herself. 2 more nights to navigate this delicate dance between obligation and attraction, between past and future, between the woman she was and the woman she was becoming. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Zara's dreams were filled with moonlit gardens and the echo of a waltz. In them, she was dancing with a man whose eyes held galaxies and whose touch could make her heart forget every reason why falling for him would be dangerous. The first night was over, but its effects would ripple through all that was to come, changing both of them in ways neither could have predicted. Chapter 3. Unexpected Understanding. The Metropolitan Museum's Grand Hall had been transformed for the Foundation's annual art auction. Paintings and sculptures lined the walls, each piece carefully chosen to represent hope, healing, and humanity's capacity for growth. Zara stood before a particularly striking canvas, losing herself in the swirls of color that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. This evening's gown was emerald green silk that whispered against the marble floor as she moved. Unlike the previous night's fairy tale elegance, this dress spoke of sophistication and subtle power. Her hair fell in soft waves down her back, and the only jewelry she wore was her mother's locket. Ashwell had specified that the auction's focus should be on the art, not the attendees. "That's one of my favorites," Ashwell's voice came from behind her, sending a shiver down her spine. "The artist was one of our first grant recipients." Zara turned to face him, taking in how the classic black tie attire seemed to have been invented for him. "Tell me about them," she said softly. "Maya Chen. She was 16, living in a shelter with her mother after escaping an abusive situation." He moved to stand beside her, both of them facing the painting. "The Foundation provided art supplies, therapy, education. Now she's teaching at the Art Institute and mentoring other young artists." The colors. Zara traced the air in front of the canvas, following a particularly vibrant streak of blue. "They're like emotions, made visible." That's exactly what she said when she donated it. Ashwell watched her hand move through the air. "You understand art." "I understand the need to create beauty from pain." She lowered her hand, feeling his eyes on her profile. "Sometimes it's the only way to survive." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Then the curator approached, breaking their private bubble with logistics about the evening ahead. Zara listened carefully as the woman explained the auction procedures and highlighted key pieces they should promote to specific donors. "Miss Sweet will be assisting me with the contemporary section," Ashwell informed the curator. "She has quite an eye for emerging artists." The curator's eyebrows rose slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Of course, the Rothman Group is particularly interested in that category. They're looking to donate a significant amount tonight." As they moved through the growing crowd, Zara felt more confident than she had at the previous evening's benefit. Art was a language she spoke fluently, having spent countless hours in museums during her college years, studying how different artists translated human experience into visual form. "The brushwork here," she explained to an interested couple, "shows the artist's journey from chaos to order. See how the strokes become more controlled as your eye moves across the canvas? It mirrors the Foundation's mission, helping people find their way from turbulence to stability." Ashwell, speaking with another group nearby, caught her eye and smiled. The warmth in his expression made her heart flutter. The auction itself was a masterclass in sophisticated fundraising. Ashwell worked the room with practiced ease, but Zara noticed how he always seemed aware of her location, how his body would angle toward her even when speaking to others. When she successfully convinced the Rothman Group to bid on 3 pieces by emerging artists, his hand found the small of her back, the touch sending warmth spreading through her body. During a brief lull, they found themselves in a quiet corner of the gallery. "You're remarkable," Ashwell said softly. "Everyone's enchanted by you." "I'm just being honest about the art," Zara demurred. "These pieces speak for themselves." "It's more than that." He turned to face her fully. "You see the story behind each piece, The humanity in the brushstrokes. It's rare to find someone who looks beyond the surface. Their eyes met, and Zara felt the air between them charged with possibility. Sometimes, she said carefully, beautiful things hide painful truths. Like you? The question was gentle but direct. Zara's breath caught. I'm not hiding anything. You know why I'm here. Do I? He stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. Because the woman I've spent these evenings with seems very different from the desperate daughter who walked into my office. Maybe I'm both, she whispered, echoing her words from their first meeting. Maybe we all have different sides, different stories. Tell me one of yours, he suggested, leading her to a secluded alcove where a small sculpture garden created an intimate space. Something real. Zara touched her mother's locket, drawing strength from its familiar presence. When I was younger, before my mother got sick, we used to visit this small gallery in our neighborhood. The owner would let me sit for hours, sketching the paintings. I wanted to be an artist then. What changed? Reality, medical bills, the need for a steady income. She smiled sadly. Teaching art to children became my compromise, a way to keep the dream alive while being practical. And now, do you still create? Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep. She looked down at her hands. I have a drawer full of sketches I've never shown anyone. I'd like to see them someday, Ashwell said quietly. The simple statement, the assumption of a future beyond their 3-night arrangement, made Zara's heart race. Your turn, she said, trying to steady herself. Tell me something real about you. He was quiet for a moment, considering. When I was building the company, I lived in my car for 6 months, showered at a gym, worked out of public libraries, wore the same 3 suits rotated carefully to maintain appearances. Every morning, I'd park outside this museum and watch people going in and out, promising myself that someday I'd be able to walk through those doors without counting the cost of admission. Zara studied his face, seeing beyond the polished exterior to the hunger and determination that must have driven him. That's why you started the foundation. Partly. He smiled slightly. I remember what it's like to have potential, but lack resources. To know you could achieve something, if you just had a chance. His expression darkened. Which is why your stepfather's actions hit so hard. That money wasn't just numbers on a page, it was opportunities stolen from people who needed them. Shame washed over Zara. I'm so sorry, she whispered. No. His hand caught her chin, gently forcing her to meet his eyes. We've been through this. You're not responsible for his choices. But I am responsible for making it right, she insisted. Is that all this is to you? Making things right? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Zara's heart pounded as she realized how close they were standing, how his hand had moved from her chin to cup her cheek, how his eyes seemed to draw her in like gravity. She started, but was interrupted by the curator calling for Ashwell's attention. A major donor needed his input on a bidding war that had broken out over one of the showcase pieces. The moment shattered like spun glass. Ashwell dropped his hand, though his eyes lingered on her face. We should get back. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of heightened awareness. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, every moment their paths crossed seemed charged with new meaning. And Zara found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the way he commanded attention without seeking it, how his smile would soften when speaking about the foundation's work, the genuine interest he showed in every person he spoke with. As they worked the room, she began to notice little things she hadn't before. How he always positioned himself between her and large groups, creating a buffer of space when she seemed overwhelmed. How he would subtly guide conversations away from topics that made her uncomfortable. How his hand would find her elbow or the small of her back, not possessively, but supportively. The auction was a tremendous success, raising more than double the previous year's total. As the evening wound down, Zara found herself back in front of Maya Chen's painting, letting its swirling colors calm her racing thoughts. "Still your favorite?" Ashwell asked, appearing beside her. "It reminds me of something my mother used to say," Zara replied, "that art isn't about making pretty pictures, it's about making people feel less alone." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was." Zara touched her locket. "She would have liked you, I think." The simple statement seemed to affect him deeply. They stood in companionable silence for a moment before he spoke again. "The car's waiting. May I drive you home?" The ride was quiet, filled with unspoken words and lingering glances. When they pulled up to her building, Ashwell got out to open her door, helping her from the car with a gentleman's grace. "Thank you," she said softly, "for trusting me with tonight. Thank you for proving my trust well placed." He paused, then added, "One more night." The reminder of their arrangement sent a pang through her chest. "One more night," she echoed. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for just a moment against her skin. "Sleep well, Zara." She watched the car disappear into the night, her skin still tingling where he had touched her. Inside her apartment, she carefully hung up the emerald dress, trying not to think about how empty her closet would look when these borrowed pieces of glamour were gone. As she got ready for bed, Zara caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized herself. It wasn't the sophisticated makeup or the elegant hairstyle, it was the look in her eyes, the way she held herself, as if something fundamental had shifted in her core. She pulled out her sketchbook for the first time in months, letting her pencil trace the lines of memory, the curve of his smile, the strength in his hands, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. The drawing took shape under her fingers, becoming more than just a portrait. It was a confession in graphite and shadow, a truth she wasn't ready to speak aloud. One more night, she thought as she finally drifted off to sleep. One more night to pretend this could be real, that she could belong in his world of art and elegance and possibility. One more night before reality reclaimed her, before she had to remember who she really was and why she was really there. But as she dreamed, her mind replayed the moment in the sculpture garden, the feeling of his hand on her cheek, the question in his eyes that she hadn't had the chance to answer. And in her dreams, she was brave enough to tell him the truth, that this had become about so much more than making things right. Chapter 4. A Growing Connection. The symphony hall glowed like a jewel in the evening light, its classical architecture a testament to timeless beauty. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation, not just for the night's performance, but for what it represented. This was the final evening of Zara and Ashwell's arrangement, and both felt the weight of ending hovering over them like a shadow. Tonight's gown was different from the others, a deep burgundy creation that seemed to capture and hold the light, making Zara appear to glow from within. Her hair was styled in an elegant chignon, exposing the graceful line of her neck. When she'd seen herself in the mirror, she hardly recognized the sophisticated woman looking back at her. The car ride to the symphony had been quieter than usual, filled with unspoken words and stolen glances. Ashwell looked particularly handsome in his tuxedo, but there was a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there before. Several times he seemed about to speak, only to fall silent again. Now, as they made their way through the grand foyer, Zara was acutely aware of his hand at the small of her back, of how natural it felt to walk beside him, of how many eyes followed their progress. In just 3 nights, they had become a recognized pair in this glittering world of philanthropy and power. "The program tonight is particularly special," Ashwell murmured as they greeted various Foundation board members. Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 6, the Pathétique. It was his final symphony, written from the depths of his soul. "I know it," Zara replied softly. "My mother used to play recordings while she painted. She said it was like listening to a heartbreaking in the most beautiful way possible." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "You continue to surprise me." Before she could respond, they were approached by an elegant older couple, the symphony's primary patrons. Zara watched as Ashwell smoothly engaged them in conversation about the Foundation's new music education initiative, providing instruments and lessons to underprivileged children. "Actually," he said, drawing her into the conversation, "Zara has been instrumental in implementing the program at her school. The results have been remarkable." Zara found herself describing how music had transformed some of her most troubled students, giving them a voice and a purpose. As she spoke, she felt Ashwell's eyes on her, saw the warmth in his expression when she glanced his way. The lights flickered, signaling that it was time to take their seats. Their box was perfectly positioned, offering an intimate view of the orchestra while maintaining a sense of privacy. As they settled in, Zara became aware of how close they were sitting, of how their arms brushed whenever either of them moved. The first notes of the symphony filled the hall, rich and deep, full of longing. Zara closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. When she opened them again, she found Ashwell watching her instead of the orchestra, an intensity in his gaze that made her breath catch. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for her hand where it rested on the armrest between them. His fingers interlaced with hers, the touch sending electricity through her veins. They sat like that through the first movement, connected by this simple point of contact, neither willing to break the spell. During the intermission, they remained in their box, speaking in low voices about everything and nothing. Their favorite composers, childhood memories, dreams they'd held close to their hearts. It was the most personal conversation they'd had, yet it felt as natural as breathing. "My father used to say that music was God's way of reminding us we're not alone," Zara said, leaning against the balcony rail. "That no matter what we're feeling, someone else has felt it too, strongly enough to turn it into song." "Wise man," Ashwell replied, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Is that why you fought so hard to keep the arts program at your school?" "Partly." She turned to face him. "Art, music, they're not luxuries. They're lifelines. Sometimes they're the only way to express what's too big for words. Like what you're feeling right now." His voice was soft, his eyes searching hers. Zara's heart thundered in her chest. "I dot." Her phone buzzed in her clutch, the harsh intrusion of reality breaking the moment. She glanced at the screen and felt her blood run cold. 3 missed calls from Andrew. Ashwell noticed her change in expression immediately. "What is it?" "My stepfather," she whispered, her hand trembling slightly as she put the phone away. "He's been calling." "Has he been pressuring you about our arrangement?" "No, I haven't told him the details, but he keeps asking questions, wanting to know if everything's taken care of." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly chilled despite the warmth of the evening. Ashwell stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring. "You don't have to deal with him alone anymore." "Don't I?" She looked up at him, vulnerability clear in her eyes. "After tonight our arrangement is over. You've been more than generous, giving me this chance to make things right. But let's not pretend it's more than what it is." "And what exactly do you think this is?" He caught her chin gently, forcing her to maintain eye contact. "Because from where I'm standing, it stopped being just an arrangement somewhere between your passion for art and the way you light up when talking about your students." The second movement began below, the music swelling with hope and yearning. Zara felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Please don't," she whispered. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Stay for one more evening, he said suddenly. Not for any deal or arrangement, just because you want to. The invitation hung in the air between them, full of possibility and danger. Before Zara could respond, they were interrupted by the return of other patrons to nearby boxes. The moment shattered, leaving them both aching with words unsaid. The rest of the performance passed in a haze of emotion, the music seeming to express everything they couldn't say. During the famous Adagio Lamentoso, Zara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Without a word, Ashwell offered his handkerchief, his fingers brushing hers in a touch that felt like a promise. As the final notes faded away, the audience erupted in applause. But Zara and Ashwell remained still, caught in their private world of unspoken feelings and impossible choices. The drive home was filled with electric silence. When they reached her building, Ashwell got out to open her door as always, but this time he kept hold of her hand after helping her out of the car. "Think about what I said," he murmured, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "One more evening. No expectations. No arrangements, just us." Zara looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the hopeful vulnerability that matched her own. "I'll think about it," she promised softly. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned, romantic, and it made her heart skip several beats. "Good night, Zara sweet," he said, his voice rich with unspoken emotion. She watched the car disappear into the night, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it. Inside her apartment, she carefully hung up the burgundy gown, trying not to think about how it might be the last such dress she would ever wear. As she was getting ready for bed, her phone buzzed again. Andrew. This time, she let it go to voicemail, not wanting his voice to taint the memory of this evening. But his persistence left her uneasy, a dark cloud threatening the dreamlike quality of the past 3 nights. Sitting at her small desk, Zara pulled out her sketchbook and began to draw. The images flowed from her pencil. Ashwell's profile in the symphony box, their clasped hands, the way he looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice. Each sketch was a memory, a moment she wanted to preserve before reality reclaimed her. The last drawing was different, a self-portrait of sorts, showing her as she appeared tonight in the burgundy dress, but with shadows creeping in at the edges of the page. It captured exactly how she felt, caught between 2 worlds, between who she was and who she could be, between duty and desire. As she finally lay down to sleep, Zara's mind whirled with possibilities. Ashwell's invitation echoed in her thoughts, tempting her with the promise of more evenings, more shared glances, more of this connection that had grown between them like a delicate flower pushing through concrete. But Andrew's missed calls weighed on her conscience, reminding her of obligations and consequences. Everything had a price. She knew that better than most. The question was, what would be the cost of following her heart? Her dreams that night were a chaos of music and memory, Tchaikovsky's symphony weaving through scenes of the past 3 evenings, each moment tinged with both joy and melancholy. And through it all, Ashwell's voice asking her to stay, offering her a choice she never thought she'd have. What she couldn't know, as she finally drifted into deeper sleep, was that forces were already in motion that would make her decision for her, forces that would test not just their growing feelings, but everything they thought they knew about trust, truth, and the price of freedom. Chapter 5. The Breaking Point. The evening that should have been their 4th together dawned grey and threatening, as if the weather itself sensed the turning point ahead. Ashwell spent the day distracted, checking his phone more often than he had in years, hoping to see a message from Zara confirming she would join him that night. The restaurant he'd chosen was intimate, far from the glittering social scenes of their previous evenings. A small Italian place in the historic district, where the chef still made pasta by hand and the wine cellar held secrets passed down through generations. He'd requested a private corner table, wanting no distractions from what he hoped would be the beginning of something real. But as 7 o'clock came and went, the carefully chosen bottle of Barolo remained unopened, the candles burning lower with each passing minute. Ashwell felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine anxiety. His fingers drummed against the pristine white tablecloth as he checked his phone for the 100th time. No messages, no calls, nothing. By 8, concern had overtaken disappointment. This wasn't like Zara. Even if she decided not to pursue whatever was growing between them, she would have let him know. She was too considerate, too honest, to simply disappear. The drive to her apartment was tense, his usual calm replaced by a growing sense of unease. The doorman recognized him immediately, but his expression only deepened Ashwell's worry. "Miss Sweet left early this morning, sir," he said, shifting uncomfortably. "There was an incident. Her stepfather came by." Ashwell's blood ran cold. "What kind of incident?" "There was shouting. I was about to call the police, but she left with him. Said everything was fine, but—" The doorman hesitated. "She didn't look fine, sir. The elevator ride to her floor felt endless." Ashwell's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. When he reached her door, he knocked firmly, calling her name. Silence answered. He was about to turn away when he heard movement inside. The door opened to reveal Andrew Simons, his expensive suit wrinkled, his eyes glassy with what might have been alcohol or something worse. "Well, well," Andrew drawled, leaning against the doorframe, "if it isn't the knight in shining armor himself." "Where is she?" Ashwell's voice was deadly quiet. "Not here." Andrew's smile was sharp-edged and mean. "But don't worry, she's safe, for now." "What do you want?" Andrew straightened, dropping the artificial pleasantness. "What I've always wanted, money. You've been generous with my stepdaughter, Prince. Very generous. Those lovely dresses, those glamorous evenings, she told me all about it. She would never—" "No?" Andrew pulled out a phone, Zara's phone, Ashwell realized with a sinking feeling. "She didn't have to. I've been watching. 3 nights of playing Cinderella at your fancy parties, but now the clock has struck midnight, and it's time to talk business." Ashwell's hands clenched at his sides. "The Foundation's agreement was with Zara, not you." "About that agreement." Andrew's smile turned predatory. "I'm proposing a renegotiation. Your little arrangement with Zara, consider it terminated. If you want to see her again, we'll need to discuss new terms." "You're blackmailing me." "Blackmail is such an ugly word." Andrew examined his manicured nails. "I prefer to think of it as a business opportunity. After all, what would your board of directors think if they knew you'd been entertaining a young woman in exchange for covering up financial misconduct? The scandal would be devastating." "Where is she?" Ashwell repeated, his voice tight with controlled rage. "Safe, as I said, and she'll stay that way as long as we come to an understanding." Andrew pulled an envelope from his jacket. "My terms are simple. $5 million transferred to an offshore account. Once the money clears, Zara goes free, and this whole unfortunate situation disappears." Ashwell took the envelope but didn't open it. "How do I know she's really safe?" Andrew pulled out Zara's phone again, scrolled for a moment, then held it up. The photo showed Zara in what appeared to be a small room, her face tear-stained but defiant. The timestamp showed it was taken just hours ago. "You won't get away with this," Ashwell said quietly. "I already have." Andrew's confidence was absolute. "You have 24 hours to make the transfer. I'll text you the details from this phone. And Prince?" His eyes hardened. "Don't try anything clever. Zara's safety depends entirely on your cooperation." The door closed in Ashwell's face, leaving him alone in the hallway with the envelope and a storm of emotions he hadn't felt in years. Rage, fear, guilt, but underneath it all a cold, calculating determination. Back in his car, he opened the envelope. Inside were banking details and a typed note reiterating the threats. But there was something else. A small piece of paper that had fallen into his lap. He recognized Zara's handwriting immediately. "Don't trust him. Storage Unit 247. Be careful." The note was smeared as if written in haste, but it was unmistakably hers. Ashwell started the car, his mind already formulating plans. Andrew might think he held all the cards, but he had underestimated two very important things: Ashwell's resources and Zara's intelligence. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Calls were made, surveillance footage was reviewed, and pieces of a puzzle began falling into place. Andrew's desperation wasn't just about money, it was about survival. His gambling debts went far deeper than the foundation theft, and the people he owed weren't known for their patience. By midnight, Ashwell had a clearer picture of what they were dealing with. The storage facility was easy to find, one of those anonymous places on the outskirts of the city. Unit 247 was registered to a shell company that took only minutes to trace back to Andrew. But timing was crucial. If Andrew suspected his plan was unraveling, Zara could be in even more danger. Every move had to be calculated, every contingency planned for. In his office, surrounded by the evidence of his success, Ashwell felt a deeper truth settling into his bones. The past 3 nights hadn't been an arrangement or a business deal. They'd been an awakening, showing him what was missing in his carefully constructed world. He picked up his private phone and made one final call. "It's time," he said simply. "Put everything in motion." As dawn approached, storm clouds gathered over the city. In a small room somewhere, Zara waited, holding on to hope and the knowledge that she'd managed to leave a clue. And in his office, Ashwell Prince prepared for battle, not with the weapons of the business world, but with something far more powerful, the determination of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. The next 24 hours would change everything. Lives would be transformed, truths would be revealed, and the price of freedom would finally be paid, not in money, but in courage, trust, and the kind of love that breaks all chains. Thunder rolled in the distance as Ashwell checked his watch one last time. The countdown had begun, and with it the real test of what had grown between him and Zara in those 3 magical nights. This was no longer about arranged evenings or social obligations. This was about protecting someone who had become more precious to him than any business deal or social standing. In the growing storm, he allowed himself one moment of pure emotion, remembering Zara's smile, the way her hand felt in his, the depth of understanding in her eyes when she looked at him. Then he locked those feelings away, letting cold determination take their place. Andrew Simons had no idea what he'd awakened. Not just a wealthy businessman, but a man who had found something worth any price to protect. The game was about to change, and Ashwell Prince was playing for keeps. Chapter 6. The Search. The storm that had threatened all night finally broke over the city, rain lashing against the windows of Prince Industries' executive floor. Ashwell stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection ghostly against the pre-dawn darkness. Behind him, his office had been transformed into a command center, multiple screens displaying surveillance footage, financial records, and a complex web of Andrew Simmons connections. "Sir," his head of security, James Chen, approached with a tablet. "We've got something from the storage facility's cameras." The footage was grainy, but clear enough to show Andrew's car arriving early that morning, Zara in the passenger seat. She appeared conscious, but distressed. More telling was the second car that arrived minutes later, a black SUV with tinted windows and no plates. Run facial recognition on the driver, Ashwell ordered, studying the blurry figure that emerged briefly from the SUV. And get me everything on Andrew's gambling contacts from the last 6 months. His private investigator, Maya Rodriguez, was already pulling up records. His debts go deeper than we thought, she reported, fingers flying over her keyboard. He owes money to the Constantine family. Ashwell's jaw tightened. The Constantines were notorious in the city's underground, loan sharks who had graduated to more sophisticated forms of financial crime. If they were involved, the situation was even more dangerous than he'd feared. There's more, Maya continued. Andrew's been moving money through a series of shell companies. Not just the foundation funds, we're talking tens of millions. He's been running a sophisticated embezzlement scheme across multiple organizations. The foundation was just the tip of the iceberg, Ashwell murmured. Zara had no idea. Sir? His assistant appeared with a burner phone. It's time for the scheduled check-in. Ashwell took the phone, his expression hardening. The call connected after one ring. Right on time. Andrew's voice was smug. Have you had a chance to consider my offer? I'm transferring the money now, Ashwell replied coldly. But I want proof Zara's okay. So concerned for my stepdaughter's welfare. Andrew chuckled. Don't worry, she's fine. A bit upset about missing your romantic evening, but she'll get over it. In the background, Ashwell could hear faint movement, what might have been a muffled voice. Let me speak to her. All in good time. First, the money. It's being processed. International transfers take time, even for me. Ashwell nodded to Maya, who was tracing the call. But Andrew, understand something. If anything happens to her, there won't be anywhere in the world you can hide. Threats don't become you, Prince. Andrew's voice hardened. Remember who holds the cards here. One word from me, and your precious reputation is ruined. The noble philanthropist, caught in a sordid scandal with an employee's daughter. The press would have a field day. You really think I care about scandal right now? No, Andrew admitted, but you care about her, and right now her safety depends entirely on your cooperation. I'll call again in 2 hours. Have the money ready. The line went dead. Maya looked up from her computer. We got it. Signals coming from the industrial district near the old shipping yards. That's 10 miles from the storage facility, James noted. He's trying to create a false trail. Ashwell turned back to the windows, watching lightning split the sky. Tell me about the storage unit. Unit 247 is on the 2nd floor. James pulled up the facility's blueprints. Limited access points, good visibility of the surrounding area. If Andrew's holding her there, he chose well. No, Ashwell shook his head. Zara's note wasn't telling us where she is. It's telling us where to find something else. Something Andrew doesn't know about. Understanding dawned on Maya's face. Evidence. She's been gathering it for months, Ashwell confirmed. Protecting herself, building a case. The storage unit is where she kept it all. We can have a team there in 20 minutes, James offered. No, Ashwell grabbed his coat. I'm going myself. Andrew's watching the building. If he sees a tactical team, we lose our advantage. Sir, it's not safe. Have a team on standby, Ashwell cut him off. But stay out of sight. Maya, keep working on those financial records. I want to know every account, every transaction. James, get me blueprints of all properties owned by the Constantine family in the industrial district. The storm had intensified by the time Ashwell reached the storage facility. Rain drummed against his car's roof as he surveyed the area, noting the security cameras' positions. The facility was quiet at this hour, most of the lights off except for the essential safety illumination. Using the code he'd obtained from the facility's database, he entered through a side door, taking the stairs rather than the elevator. Unit 247 was halfway down a dimly lit corridor, its padlock identical to all the others. The lock's combination came from Zara's phone records, the last 4 digits she'd dialed before Andrew took her. Inside, the unit was meticulously organized. Boxes lined the walls, each labeled with dates and categories, but it was the laptop sitting on a small desk that caught his attention. The password prompt glowed in the darkness. Ashwell smiled slightly, remembering their conversation in the museum garden. He typed, "Beauty from pain." The screen came to life, revealing folders upon folders of documented evidence. Financial records, photographs, audio recordings. Zara had been thorough, but it was a video file dated just 2 days ago that made his breath catch. Zara's face filled the screen, her expression determined despite the fear in her eyes. "If you're watching this, something's gone wrong. Andrew's been embezzling for years, not just from the foundation. The evidence is all here, organized by date and company. But that's not the worst of it." She glanced over her shoulder before continuing. "He's working with the Constantines, helping them launder money through legitimate businesses. I have proof, account numbers, recordings, everything." The video ended with Zara looking directly into the camera, her voice soft but strong. "Ashwell, if you find this, I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you everything, but I needed to be sure. Please be careful. Andrew's desperate, and desperate men are dangerous." Thunder crashed outside as Ashwell copied the files to a secure drive. His phone buzzed. Maya had sent the location of 3 Constantine properties in the industrial district. One was an abandoned warehouse near where they'd traced Andrew's call. Back in his car, Ashwell connected with his team. "Maya, send everything we just found to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. James, get your team in position around the warehouse, but do not move in. Andrew's not working alone, and we can't risk Zara's safety." The rain was easing as he drove toward the industrial district, his mind racing through scenarios and contingencies. The pieces were falling into place, but the next few hours would be critical. One wrong move could have devastating consequences. His phone rang, the burner phone. Andrew was calling early. "Change of plans?" Andrew's voice was tense, agitated. "The money, now, no more delays." "What's wrong, Andrew?" Ashwell kept his voice calm. "Your friend's getting impatient." A pause, then a curse. "You've been busy. Storage Unit 247 sends its regards. You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Actually, I do. The Constantines, the money laundering, all of it. Right now, the FBI is receiving enough evidence to put you away for decades, but we can still deal." "Deal?" Andrew laughed harshly. "What could you possibly offer me now?" "A way out. Money, new identity, clean passport. Enough to disappear before the Constantines realize you've been exposed. All I want is Zara." Another pause, longer this time. In the background, Ashwell could hear voices arguing in Russian. "1 hour," Andrew finally said. "The warehouse at Pier 17. Come alone, bring proof of the transfer. And Prince, no police, or she dies." The line went dead. Ashwell immediately contacted his team. "Did you get that?" "Warehouse is confirmed," James replied. "Thermal imaging shows 4 heat signatures inside, 1 stationary, likely Zara." "Have the FBI move in as soon as we have her," Ashwell ordered. "But no one moves until my signal. Everything depends on timing now." The warehouse loomed ahead, a dark mass against the lightening sky. As Ashwell parked, he touched the inside pocket of his jacket, feeling the reassuring weight of what it contained. Then he stepped out into the drizzling rain, ready to face whatever came next. Behind him, the storm was finally breaking, dawn's first light piercing through the clouds. Somewhere in that warehouse, Zara was waiting. And this time, Ashwell Prince wasn't just fighting for justice or reputation. He was fighting for love. The real game was about to begin, and he intended to win. Chapter 7. Hidden Strength. The warehouse office where they held Zara was cold, the kind of deep chill that seeps into bones and settles there. She sat in a metal chair, her wrists bound with zip ties, but her mind was racing, calculating, planning. The burgundy dress from the symphony still hung in her closet, a reminder of what should have been. Instead, she wore jeans and a sweater, her hair falling loose around her face, a shield behind which she could observe without being noticed. Andrew paced the small space, his expensive shoes clicking against concrete, his usual polished demeanor cracking with each passing hour. Two men in dark suits stood by the door, speaking in low Russian. The fourth man, clearly the leader, sat at a desk watching Andrew with the patient menace of a predator. "She knows nothing," Andrew was saying, his voice tight with desperation. "She's just a teacher, for God's sake." The man at the desk, Victor Constantine, Zara had learned, smiled thinly. A teacher who managed to document 5 years of financial transactions, who created detailed records of our entire operation. "I think perhaps you underestimate your stepdaughter, Mr. Simons." Zara kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt a flicker of satisfaction. For years she had played the role they expected, the naive daughter, the dutiful teacher, someone to be underestimated and ignored. They never noticed her taking pictures of documents left carelessly on Andrew's desk, recording conversations during his late-night phone calls, building a case piece by careful piece. "Prince will pay," Andrew insisted. "He cares about her. You saw them together at the symphony." "Ah, yes, your little arrangement." Victor's smile turned cruel. 3 nights of playing Cinderella. "Tell me, Miss Sweet, did you enjoy your taste of luxury?" Zara met his gaze steadily. "It was never about luxury." "No?" He leaned forward. "Then what was it about?" "Justice." The word was quiet but firm. "Everything I did, every piece of evidence I gathered, was about bringing the truth to light." Victor's eyes narrowed. "And what truth is that?" "That my stepfather isn't just a thief, he's a coward who preys on the vulnerable. That your family doesn't just break kneecaps anymore. You break entire communities with your schemes." Zara straightened in her chair. "I know about the shell companies, the fake charities, how you use them to launder money through legitimate businesses. I know everything." The silence that followed was deafening. Andrew had stopped pacing, his face drained of color. The guards by the door shifted uneasily. Victor stood slowly, walking around the desk to study her more closely. "Impressive. But tell me, what did you hope to achieve? Surely you must have known how dangerous this information could be." "I hope to protect people," Zara replied simply. "The children who lost opportunities because you stole from charitable foundations. The small businesses destroyed by your loan shark operations. The families torn apart by your schemes. Noble goals." Victor's voice was soft, dangerous, but perhaps misguided. "You see, the world is not so simple as you imagine. There are necessary evils, compromises that must be made." "There's nothing necessary about stealing from children," Zara cut him off. "Nothing noble about destroying lives for profit." A sharp crack echoed through the room as Victor slapped her. Zara's head snapped to the side, but she didn't make a sound. When she turned back to face him, her eyes were blazing. "Hit me all you want," she said quietly. "It doesn't change the truth, and it doesn't change the fact that right now, everything I've gathered is being delivered to the authorities." Andrew stumbled forward. "What? No, that's impossible. The storage unit was exactly where I wanted it to be." Zara smiled slightly. "Did you really think I wouldn't have a backup plan? That I wouldn't make sure the truth came out no matter what happened to me?" Victor's face darkened. "You've been playing a very dangerous game, Miss Sweet." "No game," she replied. "Just justice. Something neither of you would understand." The burner phone on the desk rang, cutting through the tension. Andrew lunged for it, his hands shaking as he answered. "Prince? Yes, she's alive. No, you listen to me." Victor snatched the phone. "Mr. Prince, your reputation precedes you. Yes, she's here, but I'm afraid the situation has become more complicated." Zara could hear the low murmur of Ashwell's voice through the phone, but couldn't make out the words. Her heart ached, remembering how different things should have been tonight. They should have been at that Italian restaurant he'd mentioned, sharing wine and stories, exploring the connection that had grown between them over 3 magical nights. Instead, she was here, watching her carefully laid plans come to fruition in ways she hadn't quite expected. The evidence was safe. She'd made sure of that weeks ago, creating multiple backups, setting things in motion that couldn't be stopped, but the human cost, the danger to those she cared about, that was the variable she couldn't fully control. 1 hour, Victor was saying into the phone. "Pier 17, come alone." He ended the call and turned to the guards. "Search the building again. Make sure we're secure." As the guards left, Victor fixed his gaze on Zara. A remarkable woman. It's almost a shame. "That you'll have to kill me?" Zara's voice was steady. "Go ahead. It won't change anything. The evidence is already out there, and Ashwell won't stop until he brings you all down." "Such faith in your prince, charming." Victor smiled coldly. "But tell me, what makes you think he cares about anything more than his reputation? The scandal of your involvement could ruin him." "Because I know him," Zara said simply. "Not the businessman, not the philanthropist. The man who grew up with nothing, who understands the value of truth and justice, the man who sees beyond surfaces to what really matters." "How romantic." Victor's tone was mocking. "And what exactly do you think really matters?" Zara thought of the quiet moments she'd shared with Ashwell, conversations about art and music, dreams and fears, the way he'd looked at her in the symphony box, how his touch had made her feel both safe and electrified. "Love," she said softly. "Truth. The courage to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost." "Pretty words," Victor sneered. "But words won't save you." "No," Zara agreed, "but they remind me why all of this was worth it." Through the high windows, she could see the storm breaking, dawn's first light painting the sky in shades of hope. Somewhere out there, Ashwell was coming. But he wasn't coming to rescue a damsel in distress. He was coming to stand beside a warrior who had already won the most important battle. The truth was out. Justice was in motion. Whatever happened in the next hour, Zara knew she had succeeded in what mattered most. The evidence she'd gathered would bring down not just Andrew's schemes, but an entire criminal empire. Children would have opportunities again. Families would be protected. Communities would heal. And if love waited on the other side of this darkness, well, that would be a victory sweeter than any she could have imagined when she first began this journey. The sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the warehouse. Victor moved to the window, his expression hardening. "It seems your prince has arrived early." Zara closed her eyes briefly, touching her mother's locket in her mind. "No," she whispered. "Not a prince. Just a good man who understands that some things are worth fighting for." The game was reaching its end, but Zara Sweet had played her part perfectly, and now all that remained was to see justice done. Whatever came next, she was ready. Chapter 8. Justice unfolds dawn, painted the warehouse in shades of steel and gold as Ashwell Prince stepped from his car. The gravel crunched beneath his feet, each step measured and deliberate. In his hand, he carried a leather briefcase, the supposed ransom that would buy Zara's freedom. But in his pocket lay something far more valuable, a small data drive containing enough evidence to destroy an empire. Inside his ear, a nearly invisible communications device kept him connected to his team. James's voice came through clearly. 4 heat signatures on the 2nd floor. Ms. Sweet is in the northwest corner. FBI teams are in position. Ashwell didn't respond, couldn't. with Victor's men watching from the windows above. Instead, he walked steadily toward the entrance, his face a mask of careful control. But inside, his heart thundered with a mixture of fear and determination. Not fear for himself, but for Zara, who had risked everything to expose the truth. The warehouse door opened with a metallic groan. Two men in dark suits waited inside, their weapons not quite concealed beneath their jackets. They patted him down efficiently, finding nothing but the briefcase and his phone, which they confiscated. If they noticed the communications device, they gave no sign. "This way," one of them said in heavily accented English, gesturing toward a rusting staircase. The second floor was dim, despite the growing daylight, shadows clinging to the corners like old secrets. Ashwell followed his escorts down a narrow corridor, past empty offices and abandoned machinery. At the end of the hall, a door stood open, spilling fluorescent light into the gloom. His first glimpse of Zara nearly broke his composure. She sat straight-backed in a metal chair, her hands bound, but her eyes fierce and clear. A red mark bloomed on her cheek where someone had struck her, and Ashwell felt rage surge through his blood. But when their eyes met, he saw something in hers that steadied him, not fear or desperation, but quiet triumph. "Right on time," Victor Constantine said from behind an old metal desk, and looking remarkably calm for a man about to pay $5 million for a woman he's known less than a week. "The money's here." Ashwell placed the briefcase on the desk. "Now let her go." Victor smiled thinly. "Not quite yet. You see, we have a small problem. Your friend here has been quite busy, gathering evidence, documenting transactions, causing all sorts of trouble." "I know." Ashwell's voice was level. "That's why I'm here." "To save her?" Victor's smile widened. "How romantic. But tell me, Mr. Prince, what exactly are you saving her for? A few more nights of playing pretend in your glittering world? Or perhaps something more permanent? A beautiful story for the society pages? The wealthy businessman and the noble teacher who stole his heart? "You don't understand anything about us," Zara spoke for the first time, her voice strong despite her situation. "No," Victor turned to her. "Then enlighten me. What is this great love story that's worth risking everything for?" "It's not about love," Ashwell said quietly, drawing Victor's attention back to him. "It's about justice." In that moment, several things happened at once. A series of explosions rocked the building, flashbangs detonating on multiple floors. The lights went out, plunging the room into chaos. And Ashwell moved with a speed that surprised everyone, especially Andrew Simons, who had been inching toward Zara with desperate intent. The guards reached for their weapons, but FBI teams were already pouring through windows and doors. Victor lunged for his desk drawer, but found himself staring down the barrel of a gun, Ashwell's gun, which he'd retrieved from a hidden holster while everyone was distracted by the flashbangs. "Don't," Ashwell said softly. "It's over." Andrew made a final panicked attempt to grab Zara, but she was ready. Despite her bound hands, she drove her elbow back into his solar plexus, then swept his legs out from under him with a move that would have made her self-defense instructor proud. "That," she said, as he wheezed on the floor, "was for every child you stole from." FBI agents swarmed the room, securing Victor and his men. James appeared at Ashwell's side, taking control of Victor while Ashwell rushed to Zara. He cut her bonds with a pocket knife, then gathered her into his arms, his composure finally cracking. "Are you all right?" he whispered against her hair. "I am now." She pulled back slightly to look at him. "You got my message? In the storage unit?" "I got everything." He touched her cheek gently, where the mark was beginning to bruise. "You're incredible, you know that? A bit reckless maybe, but incredible." "Reckless?" She managed a small laugh. "Says the man who just walked into a warehouse full of armed criminals." "I had backup." "So did I." Her eyes held his. "I knew you'd understand the clues, knew you'd see the bigger picture." Around them, the FBI was leading their prisoners away. Andrew's protests echoed down the corridor, a pathetic sound that seemed to mark the end of an era. Victor went quietly, but his eyes promised retribution, a threat that held no power now that his empire was crumbling. "The evidence?" Zara asked softly. "Being processed as we speak. Maya's working with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. The Constantine organization, Andrew's schemes, all of it, it's coming down." Relief flooded her face, followed quickly by exhaustion. She swayed slightly, and Ashwell tightened his hold on her. "Let's get you out of here," he said gently. "The FBI can take your statement later." But as they turned to leave, Zara stopped. "Wait." She walked back to Victor, who was being handcuffed by agents. "You asked what this story was really about. It's not about love, though I found that too. It's about courage, the courage to stand up to men like you who think money and power put you above justice." Victor's face contorted with rage, but before he could speak, she continued. "Every child who lost an opportunity because of your greed, every family destroyed by your schemes, they're going to get justice now. That's what makes this story worth telling." She turned back to Ashwell, who was watching her with a mix of pride and awe. Taking his offered hand, she let him lead her out of the warehouse and into the brightening day. Emergency vehicles filled the parking lot, their lights painting the scene in red and blue. FBI agents moved purposefully, processing evidence and securing the area. But Ashwell led Zara past all of it to a quiet spot where the rising sun painted the sky in colors of hope. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now?" He turned to face her, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Now we start writing our own story. No arrangements, no pretense, just us." "Just us," she repeated, leaning into his touch. "I like the sound of that." "I should have told you sooner," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Those 3 nights, they weren't about making things right or protecting reputations. They were about falling in love with the most remarkable woman I've ever met." Tears spilled down Zara's cheeks. "Even though I lied to you, used our arrangement to gather evidence?" "You never lied about what mattered." He wiped away her tears with gentle thumbs. "Every moment we shared was real. Every conversation, every dance, every look, that was all truth." "It was," she whispered. "I never expected. When I walked into your office that day, I thought I was making a deal with the devil. Instead, I found a partner, someone who understands that some things are worth fighting for." "And are we?" he asked softly. "Worth fighting for?" In answer, Zara rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was a gentle kiss, sweet with promise and healing, but underneath ran a current of passion that spoke of all the nights to come. When they finally parted, both were smiling. "I'd say that's a yes," Ashwell murmured. The sun had fully risen now, washing away the shadows of night and secrets. In the distance, sirens wailed and reporters gathered, hungry for the story of how one of the city's biggest criminal enterprises had been brought down. But here, in this quiet moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the way Zara felt in Ashwell's arms, the future they could see in each other's eyes, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with fairy tale magic, but with the courage to fight for what's right. Justice had been served, truth had prevailed, and love, real, honest, hard-won love, had bloomed in the most unexpected of arrangements. Chapter 9. The Truth Emerges. The Prince Industries boardroom had never felt more solemn. Late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating the faces gathered around the massive table. FBI agents sat alongside corporate lawyers, their expressions grave as they pored over the mountain of evidence Zara had gathered. Zara herself sat beside Ashwell at the head of the table, her hand clasped firmly in his beneath its polished surface. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a shadow, but the determination in her eyes burned brighter than ever. "The scope of this operation is staggering," Special Agent Sarah Martinez was saying, spreading documents across the table. "Mr. Simons didn't just embezzle from the foundation. He created an entire network of fake charities and shell companies. The Constantine family used these to launder money from their illegal operations, making it appear legitimate through a series of carefully structured donations." "How many other foundations were compromised?" Ashwell asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "At least 12 that we've identified so far," another agent replied. "Children's charities, medical research foundations, educational trusts, anywhere money could be moved without attracting attention." Zara's grip on Ashwell's hand tightened. "The scholarship program at my school?" Agent Martinez nodded grimly. "One of their primary channels. They'd set up fake student accounts, divert the funds, then report the students as having dropped out or transferred. The real students never saw a penny of the money meant to help them." "That's why Marcus had to leave," Zara whispered, remembering a particularly bright student who disappeared mid-semester, and Sophia and David, all those kids who lost their chance because of him. Ashwell squeezed her hand, offering silent support. "What about the Constantine's other operations?" "We're uncovering links to everything from illegal gambling to extortion," Martinez explained. "But their real genius was in the financial manipulation. They weren't just criminals. They were destroying communities systematically, taking away opportunities from those who needed them most." "Show them the list," Zara said quietly. The agent pulled out a thick folder. Miss Sweet compiled detailed records of every student affected by the scholarship fraud. Names, dates, circumstances, everything we need to make this right. Ashwell looked at Zara with renewed amazement. "You tracked all of them?" "They weren't just numbers in a ledger," she replied, her voice strong despite the tears threatening to fall. "They were real people, with real dreams. Marcus wanted to be a doctor. Sophia was going to study engineering. David, he wrote the most beautiful poetry I've ever read." "We'll find them," Ashwell promised. "All of them. The foundation will make it right." "That's not all," Martinez continued, pulling out another file. "Miss Sweet also documented a pattern of similar operations in other cities. The Constantines were planning to expand, using the same template of compromised charities and fraudulent scholarships." The implications settled heavily over the room. This wasn't just about one foundation or one city. It was about a systematic assault on hope itself, targeting those who could least afford to lose it. "What happens now?" one of the lawyers asked. "Now we build our case," Martinez replied. "With Miss Sweet's evidence and testimony, we can shut down the entire operation. Mr. Simmons has already started talking, hoping for a deal. The Constantines won't be able to hide behind their legitimate business facade any longer." "And the students?" Zara pressed. "What about them?" Ashwell straightened in his chair. "The foundation will establish a special fund," he announced, "not just to replace what was stolen, but to expand our support. Every student who lost their opportunity will get a second chance, with additional resources to make up for lost time." The lawyers started taking notes, but Zara was looking at Ashwell with an expression that made his heart race. In her eyes, he saw the same passion for justice that had drawn him to her from the beginning. As the meeting continued, details were discussed and plans were made. The FBI would need Zara's continued cooperation as they built their case. The foundation would need to be restructured to prevent similar vulnerabilities in the future. But through it all, one thing remained constant: the connection between Zara and Ashwell, growing stronger with each revelation. When the meeting finally ended, they remained in the boardroom, watching the sunset paint the city gold. Zara stood at the window, her arms wrapped around herself, lost in thought. "How did you do it?" Ashwell asked softly, coming to stand behind her. "How did you stay strong through all of this?" "I thought of them," she replied. "All those kids who just needed a chance. Every time I was scared or doubted myself, I'd remember their faces, their dreams, and then I'd think of my mother." "Tell me about her," he said, wrapping his arms around her waist. "She always said that true strength isn't about being fearless, it's about doing what's right even when you're terrified." Zara leaned back against his chest. "When she got sick, she made me promise to use whatever talents I had to make the world better. Teaching was my way of keeping that promise." "She'd be proud of you," Ashwell murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "So proud." "I hope so." Zara turned in his arms to face him. "There's something else you should know. Something I found in Andrew's records about my mother's illness." Ashwell's expression grew concerned. "What is it?" "The experimental treatment she was denied. The one that might have saved her." Zara's voice trembled slightly. "The money was there. The foundation had approved the grant. But Andrew, he diverted it, used it to pay off gambling debts instead." The pain in her voice broke Ashwell's heart. He pulled her closer, letting her bury her face in his chest as tears finally fell. "He killed her," she whispered, "just as surely as if he'd done it with his own hands. And then he used her death to manipulate my father, to position himself to steal from other families, other mothers." "Listen to me," Ashwell said firmly, tilting her face up to his. "Your mother's legacy lives on in you, in your courage, your compassion, your determination to help others. Everything you've done, exposing the truth, protecting those students, bringing down this whole corrupt system, it's exactly what she would have wanted." "I couldn't have done it without you," Zara said softly. "Not just your resources or influence. Your belief in me, your understanding, even when I couldn't tell you everything, you trusted me." "Because I saw you," he replied simply, "not the role you were playing or the mask you had to wear. The real you, passionate, brilliant, unstoppable when fighting for what's right." Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of tears and triumph, of endings and beginnings. When they parted, both were smiling despite the emotional weight of the day. "So what now?" Zara asked, echoing her question from that morning. "Now we keep fighting," Ashwell answered. "Together. The foundation needs rebuilding, those students need finding, and there are probably other operations like this that need exposing." "Together," she repeated like a promise. "No more arrangements or pretense. No more hiding or playing roles. Just us." "Just us," he agreed. "And all the battles worth fighting." The city spread out below them, glowing in the last light of day. Somewhere out there, lives were already being changed by the truth they'd helped uncover. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was still work to be done, justice to be served, wounds to be healed. But as they stood together in the gathering dusk, Zara and Ashwell knew they'd found something rare and precious. A partnership forged in the fire of fighting for what's right, a love built on the foundation of shared values and mutual respect. The truth had emerged, not just about Andrew's schemes, but about the power of courage, the importance of justice, and the unexpected ways that love can bloom in the midst of struggle. Their story was just beginning, and the chapters ahead promised to be filled with purpose, passion, and the joy of making the world a little bit better. One battle at a time. Chapter 10. Healing Together. The school auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Sunlight streamed through high windows, catching dust motes that danced like stars in the morning light. On stage, a string quartet of students tuned their instruments, new ones, provided by the restructured Foundation's music program. Zara stood in the wings, watching with tears in her eyes as Marcus, newly returned to school, adjusted his violin with careful hands. 6 weeks had passed since the warehouse confrontation, 6 weeks of testimony, reconstruction, and healing. The Foundation's special investigation had located most of the affected students, offering them not just restored scholarships, but additional support to make up for lost time. Today was a celebration of their return, a concert to mark new beginnings. "They sound amazing." Ashwell's voice came from behind her, warm and proud. "Hard to believe they've only been practicing together for a month." Zara turned to him, radiant in a simple blue dress. Music was always in their hearts. They just needed the instruments to let it out. He drew her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. These quiet moments of affection had become natural between them, their relationship deepening with each passing day. "Your mother would have loved this," he murmured. "She would have," Zara agreed softly. "Especially seeing Sophia back at the piano. That girl plays like she's speaking directly to angels." The mention of angels brought a shadow of memory, the truth about her mother's treatment, denied by Andrew's greed. But the pain was different now, tempered by purpose and the joy of helping others avoid similar fates. The audience began filing in. Parents, teachers, Foundation board members, and even some FBI agents who had worked the case. Agent Martinez sat in the front row, beaming as she recognized students she'd helped locate. The investigation was ongoing, but today was about celebration, not prosecution. "Are you ready?" Ashwell asked, noting how Zara's hands fidgeted with her mother's locket. "Almost." She turned to face him fully. "There's something I need to tell you first." His expression grew concerned. "What is it?" "I've been offered a position," she said carefully, "the new Director of Arts Education for the Foundation's youth programs. They want me to oversee the expansion of music and art therapy initiatives across all our partner schools." Joy bloomed across Ashwell's face. "That's perfect. You'd be amazing at—" He stopped, noting her hesitation. "What's wrong?" "I don't want anyone thinking I got the position because of us," she explained. "The Foundation's reputation is still healing. The last thing we need is accusations of favoritism." Ashwell took her hands in his. "The board made that offer because they saw what you did with the music program here, how you fought for these kids, tracked them down, gave them back their dreams. Our relationship has nothing to do with it." "You're sure?" "Absolutely." His smile turned mischievous. "Besides, technically you'd be reporting to the board, not me. I'm just the founder who happens to be madly in love with the most qualified candidate." Zara's heart skipped at his casual declaration of love. Though they'd grown closer each day, neither had said the words explicitly until now. "Madly in love, "Completely." He drew her closer. "When I watched you piece together the evidence that brought down Victor's empire, I was impressed. When I saw you fight for justice despite the danger, I was amazed. But watching you with these kids, seeing how you pour your heart into giving them opportunities, that's when I knew I'd never love anyone else like I love you." Tears spilled down Zara's cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered. "Not the wealthy philanthropist or the powerful businessman, just you. The man who understands that true strength lies in helping others, who fights for what's right, who sees me for exactly who I am." Their kiss was gentle, but full of promise, interrupted only by the sound of someone clearing their throat. They turned to find Marcus grinning at them. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, not looking sorry at all, "but we're ready to start. And Miss Sweet, thanks for not giving up on us." Zara squeezed his shoulder as he headed back to the stage. Never. The concert was everything they'd hoped for and more. The students played with passion and skill, their music filling the auditorium with hope. When Sophia performed her solo piece, an original composition about loss and renewal, There wasn't a dry eye in the house. During the reception afterward, Zara moved through the crowd, greeting families and sharing in their joy. She overheard snippets of conversation about future plans. David had been accepted to a prestigious creative writing program. Marcus was applying to pre-med courses. Sophia had an interview with a conservatory. "This is just the beginning," Ashwell said as they watched the celebrations. "The Foundation's new structure includes safeguards against fraud. But more importantly, it has people like you making sure opportunities reach those who need them most." "We're not just rebuilding," Zara agreed. "We're creating something better, something that would make my mother proud." Speaking of building something better, Ashwell's voice took on a nervous quality she'd never heard before. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you." Before he could continue, they were interrupted by Agent Martinez approaching with a serious expression. "Sorry to intrude," she said, "but I thought you should know. Andrew's agreed to testify against the Constantines. His full confession includes details about operations in other cities. This could help us prevent similar schemes across the country." The news settled over them, like a final piece clicking into place. Andrew's testimony meant closure, justice, and the chance to protect other communities from experiencing what they had. "Thank you," Zara said softly, "for everything." After the agent left, Ashwell turned back to Zara. "What I was trying to say, these past weeks have shown me what really matters in life. Not money or power or social standing, but the courage to stand up for what's right. The joy of helping others, the love of someone who shares your values and dreams." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Zara's breath caught as he dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the reception. "Zara, sweet," he said, his voice full of emotion, "you walked into my office making a deal to protect others, and in the process you showed me what true strength looks like. You fought for justice when it would have been easier to look away. You believed in second chances when most people would have given up. You taught me that real love isn't about grand gestures or social expectations. It's about standing together, fighting for what's right, and building something meaningful." He opened the box, revealing a ring that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated, exactly her style. "Will you marry me? Not because of any arrangement or obligation, but because I want to spend my life building something beautiful with you, fighting battles worth fighting, creating opportunities for others, and loving each other through it all." Tears streamed down Zara's face as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, to all of it." The ring slid perfectly onto her finger as applause erupted around them. Their private moment had drawn quite an audience. But neither of them noticed, too lost in each other's eyes and the promise of their shared future. From the stage, the quartet began playing again, a sweet, hopeful melody that seemed to capture everything they were feeling. Love, justice, healing, hope, all intertwined in a symphony of possibility. As they danced slowly to the music, surrounded by the joy of renewed dreams and second chances, Zara and Ashwell knew they had found something rare and precious. Their love story hadn't started with a fairy tale romance, but with the courage to fight for what's right, and that made it all the more valuable, all the more real. The foundation would continue to grow and help others. The music would play on, and their love, born in the midst of struggle and strengthened by shared purpose, would light the way forward into whatever challenges and triumphs awaited them. Chapter 11. Building Trust. The art gallery buzzed with excited conversation as donors and artists mingled beneath crystal chandeliers. This wasn't the same gallery where Zara and Ashwell had first connected over shared appreciation of emerging artists. This was something entirely new. The Foundation's arts initiative had transformed an abandoned warehouse into a showcase for young talent, particularly featuring works by students who had been affected by Andrew's schemes. Zara stood before a striking canvas, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured to the bold brushstrokes. "Sophia painted this after her first week back at school," she explained to an interested collector. "She calls it second chances." The paintings seemed to pulse with energy, darkness giving way to light, chaos transforming into harmony. Like all the pieces in the gallery, it told a story of resilience and hope. Ashwell watched from across the room, his heart swelling with pride and love. In the 3 months since their engagement, Zara had thrown herself into revolutionizing the Foundation's approach to arts education. Under her leadership, the program had expanded beyond simple funding to create real opportunities for creative expression and healing. "She's remarkable," Maya Chen said, coming to stand beside him. The artist whose work had once captured their attention at the auction was now a key advisor for the initiative. The students trust her because they know she fought for them. "We all did," Ashwell replied, but he understood what Maya meant. Zara's connection with the students went beyond professional dedication. She saw herself in their struggles, their dreams, their determination to create beauty from pain. The gallery opening was more than just a showcase, it was a statement. Every piece on display represented a story of recovery and renewal. The Foundation's new transparency policies meant that donors could see exactly how their contributions were being used, with regular updates from the students themselves. Zara made her way through the crowd to join them, her simple black dress elegant but understated. She had refused to let her new position change her essential nature. She was still the passionate teacher who believed in the power of art to transform lives. "The Richardson Foundation just pledged full university scholarships for 5 of our students," she announced, her eyes shining, "including Sophia's conservatory tuition." Ashwell pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You did this," he murmured. "We did this," she corrected. "All of us, working together." Maya excused herself to speak with some students, leaving them in a quiet moment amid the celebration. They moved to a more private corner, where a small sculpture garden created an intimate space reminiscent of their early encounters. "Do you remember the first time we discussed art?" Zara asked, running her fingers along a marble curve. "At the auction, when you caught me analyzing the brushwork. I remember thinking I'd never met anyone who saw beneath the surface so clearly." Ashwell took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "You weren't impressed by the prestigious names or price tags. You cared about the story each piece was telling." "Art was my first love," she admitted. "Before teaching, before justice, before you, though you've certainly given it competition in the love department." He chuckled, drawing her closer. "Speaking of competition, have you thought more about the wedding plans?" Their engagement had sparked immediate media interest, with society columnists speculating about what would surely be the social event of the season, but Zara had other ideas. "Actually, yes." She turned to face him fully. "What would you think about having it here? In the gallery? Not just as a venue, but as a statement. We could turn it into a fundraiser for the arts program, showcase student work, celebrate everything we've built together." Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "Instead of expensive flower arrangements, we could display sculptures. Rather than traditional music our students could perform, make it about more than just us." Ashwell felt his heart expand with love for this woman who constantly thought of others, who saw opportunities to help in every situation. "It's perfect," he said softly. "Absolutely perfect." "Really? You're not just saying that?" "Zara." He cupped her face in his hands. "From the moment you walked into my office, you've challenged every assumption I had about how things should be done. You showed me that real change happens when we think beyond conventions, when we put purpose before appearance." Tears sparkled in her eyes. "I was so scared that day," she confessed. Not of you, but of failing, of not being able to protect the people who needed protection. And now look what you've built. He gestured to the gallery full of art and hope. You didn't just expose corruption, you created something beautiful in its place. Their kiss was sweet and full of promise, interrupted by the sound of teenage giggling. They turned to find a group of students quickly pretending they hadn't been watching. "Miss Sweet," one of them called out, "could you come look at my piece? The lighting isn't quite right." "Go," Ashwell said with a smile. "Your admirers await." But Zara surprised him by taking his hand. "Come with me. These students need to know that art isn't just about individual expression. It's about building connections, creating community." As they moved through the gallery together, Ashwell was struck by how naturally Zara balanced her roles. She was still the dedicated teacher, offering gentle guidance and encouragement. But she was also a powerful advocate, speaking confidently with donors about the importance of arts funding. And through it all, she remained authentically herself, passionate, compassionate, and unafraid to fight for what mattered. Later that evening, after the last guests had departed and the gallery grew quiet, they walked among the artworks together. Each piece told a story of transformation, not just of the students who created them, but of the foundation itself. "I had a meeting with the board today," Ashwell said as they paused before a particularly moving installation. "They want to expand the program nationally, create arts initiatives in communities affected by similar fraud schemes." Zara's eyes widened. "Really? That would be incredible, challenging, exactly what you've been hoping for." "All of the above," she laughed, then grew serious. "But it would mean more travel, more time away from home." "Then we'll do it together." He pulled her into his arms. "That's what partnership means, right? Supporting each other's dreams, fighting the battles that matter, building something meaningful." "Together," she echoed, resting her head on his chest. "I like the sound of that." Through the gallery's windows, the city lights twinkled like stars. Somewhere out there, other communities waited for the kind of transformation they'd witnessed here. Other students needed the chance to tell their stories through art. Other battles for justice and opportunity needed fighting. But for now, in this quiet moment surrounded by beautiful proof of what was possible, Zara and Ashwell simply held each other. Their love had grown from something arranged into something real, something powerful enough to change lives and heal wounds. The art on the walls spoke of second chances and new beginnings. Their upcoming wedding would celebrate not just their union, but the community they'd helped build. And their future stretched out before them, full of possibilities and purpose. "I love you," Zara whispered into the peaceful quiet. "I love you too," Ashwell replied, his voice rich with emotion. "Every day, in new ways." They were building more than a marriage. They were building trust. Trust in each other, in their shared vision, in the power of love to transform lives. And that, they both knew, was the greatest masterpiece of all. Chapter 12. A New Beginning. The gallery had been transformed for the wedding. Student artwork filled every space, each piece telling part of their story. Sculptures replaced traditional floral arrangements, paintings served as backdrop to the altar, and the afternoon sun streamed through stained glass installations created by the Foundation's newest artists. Zara stood before a mirror in what had once been her classroom, now converted into a bridal suite. Her wedding dress was elegant in its simplicity, ivory silk that seemed to glow from within, much like the bride herself. Instead of elaborate jewelry, she wore only two pieces, her mother's locket and her engagement ring. Sophia, now a rising star at the conservatory, helped adjust the dress's flowing lines. "It's perfect," she said softly, "just like this whole day." Through the open window, they could hear the string quartet, all Foundation students practicing, The music wove together classical pieces with original compositions, creating something both timeless and new. Miss Sweet. Marcus appeared in the doorway, handsome in his tuxedo. It's time. Zara took a deep breath, touching her mother's locket. In the months since that first arranged meeting in Ashwell's office, life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The Foundation's work had expanded nationally, helping communities heal from similar schemes. Andrew's testimony had led to the dismantling of multiple criminal operations, but most importantly, love had bloomed in the most unexpected place. The gallery's main hall fell silent as the music changed. Zara walked down an aisle lined with art that represented healing, hope, and new beginnings. But her eyes were fixed on Ashwell, standing beneath an arch of sculpted metal and glass that caught the light like captured stars. His face, when he saw her, made her heart skip. This wasn't the polished businessman she'd first met, but the man who had fought beside her for justice, who understood her heart, who loved her for exactly who she was. The ceremony was uniquely theirs. Instead of traditional readings, students shared stories of transformation. Their vows spoke not just of love, but of purpose and partnership. When they exchanged rings, the metal had been forged with small pieces of the warehouse key, a reminder of where their journey began. Love, the officiant said, is not just about romance. It's about choosing to stand together, to fight for what's right, to build something meaningful. These two have shown us that true love can transform not just two hearts, but an entire community. Their first kiss as husband and wife was met with applause and music, a student composition that soared with hope and possibility. As they turned to face their guests, Zara and Ashwell saw not just family and friends, but a community they had helped build. The celebration that followed was a testament to their vision. Instead of a traditional reception, the gallery became a showcase of talent and triumph. Students performed music and poetry. Art was auctioned for the Foundation's new initiatives. Stories were shared of lives changed and dreams renewed. Later, as they danced among the artwork that told their story, Ashwell held Zara close. "Happy," he murmured, "more than I ever thought possible." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Did you ever imagine that first day in your office that we'd end up here?" "I knew you were special," he admitted, "but I had no idea how completely you would change my world." "Our world," she corrected gently. "Everything we've built together." The music shifted to a piece they both recognized, the symphony they'd heard on their third night together. But this time, arranged and performed by their students, it carried new meaning. It spoke not of endings, but of beginnings. As the evening drew to a close, Zara and Ashwell stood before the gallery's windows, watching the city lights twinkle like promises. Behind them, their guests continued celebrating among the art that represented so much more than decoration. "You know," Ashwell said softly, "some people might say our story began with an arrangement." "But they'd be wrong," Zara finished. "It began with courage, with the determination to fight for what's right. And it led to love. The kind of love that builds things," she agreed. "That creates change. That writes new stories." Their kiss was sweet with promise and possibility. Around them, the gallery stood as testament to what could be built from the ashes of injustice. Beauty, hope, community, love. Their love story hadn't followed a traditional path, but it had led them exactly where they needed to be. As they left the gallery that night, stepping into their future together, both knew that this wasn't really an ending at all. It was, as the chapter title suggested, a new beginning. There would be more battles to fight, more lives to touch, more beauty to create. But they would face it all together, their love strengthened by shared purpose and unwavering trust. The price of freedom, they had learned, wasn't measured in arranged nights or business deals. It was measured in courage, in commitment to justice, in the willingness to fight for what matters most. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it led to the kind of love that could transform not just two lives, but countless others. Their story would be told in the art that lined the gallery walls, in the music their students created, in the lives touched by their foundation's work. It would remind others that true love isn't about fairy tale endings, but about choosing to stand together, to fight the battles worth fighting, to build something beautiful from whatever life presents. And that, they both knew, was the greatest love story of all. Subscribe if you loved.